Welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on beautiful Market Street in Corning. I don't know, do you want to talk about Jeff Bezos' engagement? I didn't think so. So, we're going to talk about a lot of important issues this morning. You have other places you could go for that topic ad nauseum. On the program this morning, Charles Stanley. He's the author of the book Lost Airmen, the epic rescue of World War II U.S. bomber crews stranded behind enemy lines. It's out in paperback now. I thought that would be appropriate as we near Memorial Day. And speaking of Memorial Day, I received this yesterday. I want to pass it along to you so you can start making your plans. It's the Horseheads Legion and their Memorial Day parade. It's starting at 2 p.m. on Memorial Day, of course. Starts at historic Hanover Square, continuing on to the American Legion Post 442. The post is providing free hot dogs and chips for the participants, as well as selling chicken barbecue, salt potatoes, and hot sausage. Rumor is that the chicken barbecue is only $10, by the way. The music group Still Kickin' will provide free entertainment from 4 till 8 p.m. So that's a nice Memorial Day event, and I wanted to get that to you early so you could make your plans for Monday. All right, we'll go back to the main screen. So let's talk for just a moment before we go to break about the debt ceiling, about the debt limit. There was some more talks yesterday. We'll go to the screen here. There were some more talks yesterday. Optimism, a lot of optimism, but still no deal has been reached. I felt that we had a productive discussion, said Speaker McCarthy. We don't have an agreement yet, but I did feel the discussion was productive in areas that we have differences of opinions. Boy, the time frame on this is interesting. There's a point being made by Liz Peek over at Fox News, saying this actually, she doesn't put it this way, but I will, that Biden is attempting to use this in his favor, meaning you hear the scare tactics from Yellen, from Biden, that, you know, it's the end of the world. It's an economic catastrophe if a deal is not had by June 1st. And what Liz Peek is suggesting is that Biden, who we know we are, if not in a recession, headed towards a recession. So he can put all the blame, as he comes up on a re-election, he can put all the blame on Republicans if this deal is not reached by June 1st. According to Liz Peek, President Biden says Republicans want to tank the debt ceiling talks because they know a default would bring down the economy and hurt his re-election bids. But he's completely wrong on that. And why would they want to tank this? They've already come up with a plan. They said this is the start. And how long did it take to even start the negotiation process after that, after the House passed that bill? So it's disingenuous to say that and that's not Liz Peek, but others in the media are suggesting that it's the Republicans' fault on this, even though from day one, the president's saying he will not negotiate based on that bill. The economy is, the economy is already barreling towards recession, and that has nothing to do with this debt limit debate. Biden's re-election hopes are dim. Biden has it backwards. He knows a recession looms thanks to his reckless spending. This is why I bring up Liz Peek's article on Fox News, because it is the reckless spending. Let's face it, historic amounts of spending under this president, some in the name of COVID, infrastructure, these type of things. And that, of course, leads to the inflation that we're all experiencing. And what he's trying to do, or hoping to do, is pin those troubles, if you will, on the GOP. Blame the GOP, even though this recession has loomed far before this debt talk. That's why you see so much scary fear-mongering, if you will, from Yellen, from Biden, about how catastrophic the impact will be. And there's always this suggestion in the news that this isn't done. Like this hasn't been used in negotiations in the past, which just is not the case. The same thing happened when it was President Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer used these threats as negotiation, right? Biden is being dishonest with the American people, says Liz Peek. When the conference board puts the odds of recession over the next 12 months at 99%, a position that predates anything to do with the debt ceiling debate, you could bet a downturn is coming. But he sees an opportunity, a window, where he can say, well, we missed that June 1st deadline, so this is on the Republicans. And again, Republicans had a plan from the beginning with that bill, but you can almost see the articles already online and in various news outlets. And you can definitely hear what the politicians would be saying as we get closer to election, that no, the recession isn't on Biden or on us. It's on the Republicans who let that debt ceiling go by. But again, how do you blame them when they have been the one with the plan from day one? And that was a starting point, a negotiation point. And for whatever reason, of course, well, we know the reason, political grandstanding, we're stuck in this situation that we're in, where the left is essentially refusing to negotiate. So Biden said, we reiterated once again that default is off the table, and the only way to move forward is in good faith towards a bipartisan agreement. While there are areas of disagreement, the Speaker and I, and his lead negotiators, and our staffs will continue to discuss the path forward. I understand they're going to continue to talk throughout the day. We had that time frame for you yesterday where I don't even know if it's possible to make June 1st, even if everything went perfectly. So again, Liz Peek suggesting that this, it can't be avoided, the economic downturn, because of the president's own economic incompetence. We have more to talk about, but I am running a little bit late. As I said, we're going to talk with Charles Stanley, the author of Lost Airmen, coming up in just a moment. So I hope that you'll stay with us here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. A few quick things before we are joined by Charles Stanley about the debt ceiling, the debt in this country. And of course, spending so much money has caused many of the economic problems that we face. First of all, from a viewer, and you can always contact me. Let me put that information up. You can always contact me. We've been receiving a lot of great information about charitable events coming up. Also, you can weigh in on the topics that we're discussing today, or topics you'd like to see us discuss, or guests you'd like to have us have on the program. So there is our information. We'll take that down. I hope you had long enough to check it out. But if you look at the bottom of the screen with the little wave hand, that's the phone number as well. So it's always up there on the screen. So let's go to a text I received yesterday. If you and I ran our household budget like the government, we would all be living in cardboard boxes on the street. Very true. Someone should sneak a bill in between the pages of the budget that no one has the time to read, as a side note, that lowers their wages, meaning I'm assuming those in Washington, in proportion to the debt. Well, let's take a look at the debt. Drudge Report highlighted this the other day. I hope this doesn't actually make you a little seasick because it moves so fast. That is the national debt. Yes, it moves very, very quickly, but I want you to focus on something that's very important as we have these discussions. Look at the debt per citizen. So almost $95,000 per citizen. So that's everybody in America. But when you boil it down to debt per taxpayer, people that are actually working, that can pay the taxes, we each owe almost $250,000. And yet we can't negotiate about cutting back our spending. Even little changes as suggested by Republicans. And a lot of people on the conservative side of things said it wasn't conservative enough. But just minor changes, and that's a bridge too far for the Democrats in Washington. You owe, if you are a taxpayer, you owe nearly $250,000. That is amazing. Look at those numbers fly. But again, we can't have that conversation. Okay. Enough of that. That moves too fast. Makes you a little car sick. Let's take another short break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Charles Stanley, the author of Lost Airmen. And that's out in paperback now, right in time for Memorial Day. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. This section of our program brought to you by M.A. Neal Financial Services. And my guest this morning, Charles Stanley. Thanks so much for being on the program.
I'm glad to be here.
We want to talk about your book, Lost Airmen, The Epic Rescue of World War II U.S. Bomber Crew Stranded Behind Enemy Lines. The title gets you hooked, that's for sure. But it's just in time for Memorial Day and, of course, the anniversary of D-Day. Before we start talking about your book, though, you're kind of familiar with our area. We're here in Corning. You went to SUNY Buffalo.
I did. Not only am I familiar with Corning, but, of course, I've been there many times.
Yeah.
And my son went to Ithaca College, so, yes, I'm very familiar with the area.
Of course. So let's talk a little bit about the book, because it's now out on paperback. I was shocked to learn that this is your first time writing a book, and you've won awards, you've got great reviews. That must feel good.
Yeah, it does feel good, and yes, I mean to when I go to the award dinner and they give it to me, I'm going to say something like, "Is there an award for a second book?" So I'll have to write one.
It's the old joke: the rookie of the year. It's a curse because you can never win it twice.
That's right.
So the book is Lost Airmen. Let's start with maybe the simple question: who were the Lost Airmen?
Well, the Lost Airmen are 131 airmen, members of 13 crews who were shot up over Germany and bailed out or crash landed in Yugoslavia. So I always say shot up because when I used to interview the airmen, and I've interviewed about 40 of them, they would correct me when I said you were shot down over Germany. They weren't shot down; they were shot up, and of course they bailed out over Yugoslavia. So that's an important point to them.
Very much so. What was it like being stranded? I mean, I'm sure you talked to many people regarding this. Before we talk about them being stranded, but what was the situation in Yugoslavia like at this point?
Yeah, the country had been German occupied since 1941, and I think one of the things that is lost on people, because it's not a part of the world that a lot of people are familiar with, particularly in World War II, and particularly because not a lot's been written about that part of the world, and in fact, this is the first book that's been written about airmen rescued by the partisans in Yugoslavia. And maybe I should back up and say Yugoslavia for people who are born after 1990 or so.
Right.
It was a country that existed in World War II that no longer exists today, and it was comprised of modern Slovenia, Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro, Kosovo, which people have heard of because of the Balkan Wars. But yeah, it was a very important part of the world, and in World War II history, it's notable, I think, because it was the third most impacted country in Europe, or actually in the world, during World War II. So that only the Russians, number one, and the Poles, number two, and then Yugoslavs, number three. Suffered the most casualties per population. So that's a long way of answering your question. The country was devastated.
Yeah.
Quite devastated. And so when the airmen reached the ground, they had reached a country that was poor to begin with, and was enemy occupied, and was a hospitable place, but not a wealthy place to end up in.
Well, and what's it like from your research for these heroic men when they get trapped behind enemy lines? What is that feeling when they're trapped?
Well, that's a great question, because the book tries to capture what it does feel like. It isn't just about the what, where, when. It's about what it feels like to be there and to be in the air and being shot at by German flak gunners. It's a pretty desolate place for people in your neck of the woods. Anyway, maybe it's reasonably familiar because I've flown over the territory, and it looks a lot like the Adirondacks.
Oh, okay.
there's except for this pockets of cities, there's pretty much nothing there.
Okay.
And there's not much industry. There's a forestry industry, but this is a poor place. And so when they bail out, the, the, and the other thing to note is that they weren't really briefed on what they were going to meet on the ground. They had no idea of the political situation, the cultural situation, how they were going to be treated, what to expect. So yes, everything was a surprise, and and they would they met various fates. Some of them were killed. Some of them were killed in the air. Some were killed on the ground. Some were captured by the Germans, the occupying Germans, and the country had been occupied since 1941. The Germans were basically restricted to the urban areas because the underground would attack them, and there were two groups of undergrounds. There were the partisans, the communist partisans under Marshal Tito, which some people might have heard of, and then there were the Chetniks, who were royalists who were led by a guy named General Mihailovich. And you have to know a little bit about that time to know who General Mihailovich was these days.
Yeah.
So the answer was they must have been very scared, and didn't know what to expect.
And for those that became POWs, what was their life like?
Well, it was. They weren't mistreated in the way that the Japanese mistreated their prisoners, but the fact is that the Germans were starving themselves, and they didn't have a lot of food to spare for their POWs.
Okay.
So, and in fact, some of my guys, about 10 of the 130, were captured, ended up in POW camps, and their story comes long after the other guys reach safety, but they face their own trials, and particularly because the Germans were trying to keep these POWs away from the advancing Russians, and they had them retreat across Germany in what's now called the Black March, I think, to differentiate it from other death marches.
Right.
But the fact is, it was a death march, and there was no food. The civilians were hostile. If there was no escaping, where are you going to go?
Right.
And there's no food. The German civilians didn't have food, so you had to basically stay in line. And these guys really would have starved to death if not for the famous Red Cross packages that. Actually, there were heroic efforts on the part of the Red Cross to get packages to these guys because they knew that they would starve without them. And so life was not easy for the POWs at all.
We've got to take a short break. Can you stay with us?
Sure.
All right. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. This is the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program, and we're talking about Lost Airmen, the epic rescue of World War II U.S. bomber crews stranded behind enemy lines. Our guest, Charles Stanley, the Colby Award, Best Military History Book by a first-time author. When you started writing this book, did you think that you'd win awards like that or actually be recognized as an expert on the subject?
I had to become an expert because there was no such thing as an expert.
Right.
and no, I didn't even expect to write a book. All I was trying to do was figure out what happened to my father during the war, and like most veterans, he didn't talk much about. It wasn't like he was reticent about discussing his experiences. If you asked him, he'd tell you.
Okay.
But it was just they took all these guys sort of took it as a matter of fact that they had done these things and they didn't feel like heroes. They didn't need to brag about it. It just happened, and they only started talking about it when they were all about 65
Right.
during the 90s, and hence, the sensation of the Greatest Generation book, because all of a sudden everything popped, in terms of learning about these guys. So, and we didn't get serious about asking my father about this stuff when he was until he was 77,
Is that right?
because um, you figure your parents are going to be around forever, and
Right.
of course then you realize, well, maybe they won't.
Right.
So you better get going.
How much of your father's story is in this book?
Well, it's not about him.
Right.
He's one of about a dozen main characters, and it does begin with him and it does end with him. But it's not like it's about him. It's about the experience of being in the air, what it's like to be on a bombing mission, what it's like to be shot down, what it's like to be on the ground, and the adventures of all 13 crews. And my father's the head of just one of these crews.
Was there, after the war, almost a brotherhood amongst these men, or you said that they didn't really talk a lot about it, but they had to have that connection?
Well, in for most of these guys, there is a brotherhood,
Yeah.
and I think that's a great point to bring up, because there were usually 10 men in a crew, sometimes 9, sometimes 11, but generally 10. And they trained together in the United States. They went through the later phases of their training together, and yes, most of them formed a very strong bond. My father wasn't a real social guy, so he didn't keep in contact with his crew after the war, but most of the crews did. And yes, there was an extremely strong bond, as strong as you might imagine a platoon
Sure.
on the ground in World War II. Absolutely.
When you decided to write this book from beginning to end, how long did it take, and also how much research went into it?
Well, it off and on it took 22 years,
Wow.
and it. But when I began in 1999, in I was working. I was working in a pretty demanding job, and in fact, part of this time I was working for Governor Pataki,
Of course.
and on the second floor of the Capitol in the executive chamber, and I happened to be one of the people who oversaw the response to the 9/11 attacks.
Okay.
So you could imagine that kept me busy
Yes.
for a while.
Yeah.
And so and yet I realized, once I got serious about it, that these guys weren't going to be around forever, and
Right.
I knew I couldn't, because of the demands of my work. I couldn't finish the book probably in their lifetimes, but I collected as much information as I could from them while they were alive, purposely, and then turned to other aspects of the research um, later on. The history would wait, because it would always be there,
Sure.
but the guys wouldn't be.
Right.
So that's how I went about the research. So I interviewed 40 of the guys.
Oh, wow.
And I was lucky enough to have my father along on the early ones, and so he got a chance to chat with people that he experienced that occupation with. So it was very cool, and they would sort of explore their experiences with each other. It was very cool experience.
That's a really amazing story. Are there? I know this is a tough question to ask, but is there a lot of lost airmen still alive? Like, I know that that's a statistic that we don't like to talk about, but
Well, yes, we're all aware that they're mostly gone, and in fact, to my knowledge, there is only one lost airman
is
left,
that right?
and it's Joe Foto, who was born and raised on Bourbon Street in New Orleans.
Really?
And if I had been born and raised on Bourbon Street, New Orleans, I wouldn't be alive at all. But he is.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
God bless him.
Well, it's great that, like you said, you had the opportunity to collect all this information, because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of information about Yugoslavia in general during the war. So this is kind of a reference book at this point.
That was, well, it's not as dry as a reference.
Well,
book.
no, yeah.
It one of the reasons it took so long is because it tries to accomplish so many things. It's the story of these crews, but it also tries to give actually I think succeeds in giving the background of the experience, so that it gives you information on why these guys were strategically where they were, what they were doing, what their mission was, what it was like to be in the air, but also what was happening on the ground in Yugoslavia, which was really the toughest part. There's not a lot of English language literature on World War II Yugoslavia, and I had to, everything that's written about it is partisan in the sense of, historiography is reflects modern times, so that everybody has their own agenda when they have
Sure.
history, and so you kind of sort through all that, and passions are still deep in the old Yugoslavia. We know about the Balkan Wars of the '90s and Serbia and Kosovo and all the rest of it. So the passions are still very deep, and sorting through all that detail was truly difficult, really difficult. And I've had people tell me that mine is the best work that gives some context to, and has managed to sort through that, find enough data. And by the way, I've got sources in the former Yugoslavia that were able to corroborate what I've done.
Oh
Some
wow.
really astute historians from Yugoslavia who are reasonably objective about these things, and were able to verify what I've concluded.
With all your research and everyone that you talk to, is there a favorite story that you have from the Lost Airmen, from someone in the Lost
Oh,
Airmen?
I've got there's probably a story per chapter,
Yeah.
but I'll maybe just because we're visual here,
Yeah.
I'll point to
I wondered. Okay.
us behind me,
Yes. Yes.
which is a story that people like. When my father was shot down twice, and the first time he bailed out over Romania from a height of under 500 feet, which is not recommended.
Right.
In fact, you're not supposed to live through that. Second time Yugoslavia, and he gets stuck in Sanski Most, and that's the thread of most of the story. Sanski Most is in modern day Bosnia,
Okay.
and anyway, so it takes the whole book to get him out of Yugoslavia, but he carries his parachute all the way across, and he had in the first chapter he meets my mother, future mother, and so it tells a little bit about that. And in the end, we have a happy ending, an old-fashioned movie happy ending, where they get married,
Yeah.
and she gets married in a dress made from his parachute
That's amazing.
that he had carried across Yugoslavia,
That's
and that behind me is the dress that she got married in I don't know, 70 years ago.
So it's the dress and it's the parachute.
It
You've
is
got
a
both.
It is a parachute wedding dress. There aren't many of those.
No.
And in fact,
That's amazing.
I Googled it once, and there's one in the Smithsonian. So I think that thing's reasonably
Rare.
reasonably cool artifact that I'm going to leave to the Buffalo Historical Museum.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great story. Before we go, this is out on paperback now. Where's the best place to buy it?
It's I know it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. I hope it's in local bookstores. I haven't had a chance to get out. It's only been out a couple days, but yeah, the conventional. It's in bookstores. It's not a self-published thing. This is a
Right.
major
Oh, right.
publisher, and it's a sort of a big deal.
No, and I know they put together a World War II collection. Is that a part? Can you buy yours individually, or is it a part
Oh,
of
yes.
the three
Absolutely.
series?
And
Okay.
it's actually I haven't received my copy. It's so soon, so I look forward to getting that. And
So if you order it on Amazon right now, we might get it before you.
yes, indeed.
Well, finally, what's next? Are you going to write another book?
I am Actually, every day I work on the second book, which is about New York State's response to 9/11.
Appropriate.
And as I said, I was a part of the team that did that. And the odd thing is, to me anyway, as a historically minded
Right.
person, is that none of my counterparts and nobody in New York State kept the records of what we did.
Really?
I'm the only one in the universe that has New York State's record because every night after I was working, I would take home. They were called situation reports, sit reps for short, that the State Emergency Management Office would put together, and I'd put them in a box because I thought someday somebody's going to want to know about this
Yeah.
stuff. And as you know, the state isn't good at a lot, but one of the things they're good at is disposing of their own files, their old files.
Yes, yes.
So they have. So I checked, and nobody in New York State has them because they've disposed of them.
Isn't that amazing?
And, the New York State Archives wants me to give them my copies, and I'll say, sure, I'm glad to give them to you after I'm done.
Yes, right.
So,
You can kind of expect it with a World War II book, things being lost over time, but we're talking about September 11th.
exactly. It's nobody has a sense of history anymore.
Yeah.
And it kind of blows my mind that I'm the only one that has this stuff. And I also kept a journal of what was happening at the time, and of course I knew everybody who was involved,
Right.
including the governor and the high-ranking state officials. So yeah, I think it's important that just as I make sure that the lost airmen are remembered,
Right.
to make sure that the efforts of New York State during the 9/11 response are remembered too, because I think I think there's, if you ask the general public who did the 9/11 response, they'd say, well, it was Mayor Giuliani, it was
Right.
the city, it was all that. The fact is, we kind of bailed them out because their headquarters was destroyed in the attack,
Right.
and I'm not sure that without us they would have done quite as well.
Right.
So I think the world needs to know that and needs to appreciate what the state did during these times.
What's the time frame on that?
Well, I'm hoping to get it out by the 25th anniversary, which would be what, 3 or 4 years
Yeah,
from now.
yeah.
But so yeah, and I have to have it written a year before that because it takes a year for a publisher to,
Oh, wow.
run it through the mill and run the copies and everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my goal anyway, and I'm not young either, so it's got to get done.
Well, how about this? When it's done, will you come back on the program?
I'd be more than happy, or if you just want to talk about 9/11 near the anniversary, I'll be happy to.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show this morning.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We already have to take a short break because we ran long with Charles Stanley, but boy, that was a fascinating look inside that book, and to hear that story about his mother's wedding dress, amazing. I thought it would be an appropriate interview as we near Memorial Day and the anniversary of D-Day. I wanted to put my contact information up before we go to break because we received I think a really good couple of texts back to back. And if you're just joining us, in the beginning of the program, we were talking about the debt ceiling and these back and forth and how much we owe, almost $250,000 per taxpayer in debt. So what I thought is, because we do have to take a short break, I would have just enough time to show you the text that we received. 2, the real sad part is when you realize that Americans not even born yet will be forced to service our debt. Yeah, they'll be saddled with this debt. Nothing says freedom, justice, and liberty like being born into debt. A very good point. On that note, I'm going to take a sip of Culligan's water here, and then we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. All right, we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, and I am your host, Frank Aiken. We've got a couple quick things before we take our next break. We have been talking about the debt ceiling. We've been talking about the negotiations. If you would like to continue that conversation, weigh in. There again is our contact information. But I thought I'd change things up a little bit. Did you see Hillary Clinton yesterday weighing in on the president's age? Hillary Clinton saying Biden's age is a legitimate issue people have every right to consider. Now, I think many of you are, if you're conspiratorial, you're saying, wait a minute, is this her first shot? Is she going to run again? She said, it's a concern for anyone. We've had presidents who have fallen before because he tripped up on the plane, the steps coming down, but it was fine. But we've had presidents who have fallen before who were a lot younger, and people didn't go into heart palpitations. But his age is an issue, and people have every right to consider it. But he has that great saying, and I think he's right. Don't judge him for running against the Almighty, but against the alternative. I don't know. Is that a good saying? What I mean by questioning if it's a good saying or not, you're basically just saying we think he's better than your party's guy. Not on accomplishments. Well, obviously, if you look at the polls, you can't talk about the accomplishments. People are generally concerned. I mean, look at the economy. Look at foreign policy, domestic policy. Biden gets low ratings on the economy, guns, immigration, and more in the AP poll. Though I do find it, I do find it interesting that they've lumped immigration and gun control almost into the same sentence. And I wonder if that skews the numbers even more, because obviously immigration is a major, major issue. It says here that only 31% say they approve of the president's performance on gun policy and immigration. I have a feeling that it's the immigration that's really people are the most upset with, but I'll continue. Overall, 40% say they approve of the job he is doing. So that's a little bit higher than recent polls that we've seen, but not an overall glowing review for the president. Only 24% say national economic conditions are in good shape. And this goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the show. That's why if the debt ceiling debate does not make that deadline by June 1st, the president coming up on re-election is going to look for any way he can to pin it on Republicans. Liz Peek was talking about on Fox as well, that this is an opportunity in a way for the president to, even though it would have nothing to do with it. I mean, 99% of a recession within the next 12 months, it would have nothing to do with the debt ceiling. But that's how, in the political world, in the Washington world, they would try to spin it, to blame it on the Republicans, who, again, have had a plan and have put forth a bill. So it's disingenuous to suggest that they are not willing to work. Let's take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, I'm your host, Frank Acom. Before we take our last break, and then I promise we'll be right on track to finish up the program here, I wanted to mention our Congressman Nick Langworthy, who talked about immigration, because I just hinted towards that topic. Oh, that's not the right one, so we'll take that off. That was the one we talked about, but I want to talk a little bit more about presidential politics. But our Congressman Nick Langworthy said, what we have now, meaning at the border, is chaos. What we need is control and law and order. He gave a press conference in relation to immigration and as well as the federal debt ceiling negotiations. Now, if you recall, Governor Hochul is suggesting maybe we could use SUNY campuses. There's been a lot of counties in our area that have declared a state of emergency, a moratorium, if you will. So Congressman Langworthy said, the notion that everyone is an asylum seeker from a war-torn country, that's nonsense. We don't know until they actually go through a hearing. And we mentioned, and he highlights it, some are getting hearings in 2028. We've heard even into the 2030s at this point. And meanwhile, they just go about their business as people who are here with the presumption that they could maybe get asylum. And then, of course, he brought up, and I think this is a fair point, Many of the migrants don't have a record of vaccinations. Meanwhile, we are firing nurses that were so desperately needed because they refused to get a vaccination. Isn't that interesting, the double standard there? He also mentioned that some small rural schools in this district would be overwhelmed in the fall if migrants settled there from New York City. So 7 western New York counties have declared states of emergency. We'll keep an eye on that, keep you updated on it. I wanted to mention that quickly before we took our last break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Just wrapping things up for this morning's edition. Tim Scott announced yesterday. It's interesting to see some of the buzz around him, some of the backing. Drudge Report has had it up on their website, front and center, for quite a while now. Tim Scott saying yesterday, Senator Tim Scott, as he announced his run for presidency, Joe Biden and the radical left are attacking every rung of the ladder that helped me climb. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm running for president of the United States of America. He was a hometown crowd from about 2,000 people. Our nation, our values, and our people are strong, but our president is weak. America is not a nation in decline, but under Joe Biden, we have become a nation in retreat, retreating from our heritage and our history, retreating from personal responsibility and hard work, retreating from strength and security, even retreating from religious liberty and the worship of God himself. Now, Senator Scott is exactly right. The Hill has a general social survey release that found not quite 50% of Americans say they have no doubt about the existence of God. As recently as 2008, that was 60%. 34% of Americans never go to church, the highest recorded in 5 decades. So that's to Tim Scott's point. And we keep mentioning the polls that show people have lost faith in community and in faith. Lost faith in faith. Our party and our nation are standing at a time for choosing victimhood or victory, grievance or greatness. I choose freedom and hope and opportunity. Will you choose it with me? He did have to go after the attack on The View. The View, calling Senator Scott Clarence Thomas syndrome. Scott took issue with it, quoting the Bible, saying, meekness is not weakness. I believe in the gospel. I believe Matthew 5:44 says, love your enemy. But if you break in my house, I also believe in the Second Amendment. But he showed the fact that he scares Democrats because he's not the narrative that they normally push. He said it's that culture of victimhood that is eating away at the soul of America. You could be bitter or better, but you can't be both. I like that line. Oracle's Larry Ellison, while we're running late, prepares to back Tim Scott's already given $30 million to Senator Scott. I did receive one message. We don't have time to put it up on the screen, but just to show you the other perspective, I believe, this is from a viewer, I believe that if Joe Biden runs and wins, we will have our first woman president. That's a concern for a lot of people. And what I mean by the concern is Biden's health, that he may not fill out, and I think Nikki Haley was echoing that statement, may not fill out the final term. So I believe that's what this person is referencing. And then back to the first woman president, which may not be a bad thing. Maybe a woman can straighten out, what is wrong with our government. Thank you so much. That's it for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Have a great day, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I look forward to it already. Hi, I'm Frank Acom. Thanks for checking out our YouTube page. We'll be uploading each edition of Frankly Speaking 1 week after the original air date. So, let me remind you to watch the live version of Frankly Speaking, weekday mornings starting at 7, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox.